Good morning, YouTube. This is LA Prepper with a bit of a sad story. 6 people, including 2 children, killed by a brutal winter storm on the U.S. East Coast. And you will start to see pretty shortly a pattern in their deaths. 6-year-old boy killed after falling tree struck him while he was sleeping in Virginia. That's number one. Number two, a 44-year-old man died when a tree fell on a truck he was traveling in. Number three, an 11-year-old boy was killed by a falling tree in New York. Doesn't say anything more about the detail on that. 4 and 5, 2 people were hit by a tree in Rhode Island and Connecticut. And number 6, a 77-year-old woman was being killed after hit by a tree branch in Maryland. And we have some pictures here of that. Oh, this is rubble after a burnt building collapsed due to strong winds. Oh, interesting. Especially interesting because there's a lot of cinder block and the fire wouldn't have affected the strength as much of the cinder block, but at any rate. Wow, I guess we had some flooding in Quincy, Massachusetts too. About halfway up to that structure. Another tree. And shows you how strong the winds are. That branch looks, or that trunk rather, looks to be somewhere between, 14, 15, 16 inches in diameter. That is an enormous amount of force. Wind is very powerful. The pressure of wind is something like 1/2 density times velocity squared. So that velocity squared is what makes the force increase very quickly. It's why when you put your hand out the car window at 60 miles an hour, you feel a lot more force than when you're going 30 miles an hour. Definitely you feel more than twice as much force on your hand. Something like 4 times as much force. Or rather, that's not 4 times as much, but, it's actually... So 3,600 versus 900. Oh, okay, it is 4 times more. Anyways. So, what can be learned from this? Well, we only have so much control over our lives. We certainly have control over our property. But if you look at this picture, and I don't know... See, this picture wasn't involved regarding a death, right? But it certainly could have been. Could have been a gentleman or a lady, riding their bicycle, walking down the street, parked, driving, any variety of situations, right? You could certainly make a decision to stay home if the winds are very high. To not go on your regular walk, not go on your regular jog, avoid going to the store. And to be honest, I'm not, I don't know if most people would think, oh, it's a little windy, I'm going to stay home because it's dangerous outside. Most people probably wouldn't, and, you certainly can't exactly reason in your life, well, someone got killed in a car accident yesterday, I'm never going to drive anywhere ever again. There is some inherent risk in life, unfortunately. But, I'm not an arborist, so as far as how you might prevent this kind of situation at your home, I suppose the best piece of advice I could give would be find an arborist to give you a free quote, or at least an inexpensive quote. I mean, is it worth 20, 30, 40, 50 bucks, $100 to you to not have to deal with an injury to your property or an injury to your family? Repairing a section of your house, I guarantee you, is going to cost more than getting a quote from an arborist, right? And they might not even want to, cut down the whole tree. They might say your trees are looking good. They might say there's just a couple branches they might work on. But certainly, taking care of your trees is probably one of those landscaping items that most people aren't super worried about because, in all honesty, even though trees do quite often break in large storms, it's just not. It's not something that's kind of really. I don't think it sticks out in a lot of people's minds as, a very big danger or a huge risk. And, I'm not trying to, I don't know if I'm trying to raise trees up your priority list per se, but, an ounce of prevention and a pound to cure and all that, if whether or not you should be trimming your own trees or hiring an arborist to trim your trees, that's kind of a personal choice. Getting up on a ladder and doing stuff with a chainsaw, it is dangerous. If budget is a concern, you could consider maybe some alternative, right? Like maybe you can barter something that, maybe you have chickens or something, right? You could, I don't know, barter some eggs to get a reduced price from an arborist. I'm not sure, but maybe you could ask your neighbor. Does your neighbor have a chainsaw? Maybe you and your neighbor, he or she could help spot you and give you a little safety advice, or maybe your neighbor has a bigger ladder, or, I don't know what the solution is to make your property more safe. Certainly, I suppose if you saw a tree in the city that you thought was, in risk of coming down, you could say something about it. For example, I was in a park recently and I saw a branch that had blown down from a tree, and I'm sure I wouldn't have been able to look at the tree and say that branch is going to come down, but it's just kind of an example, of risks you put yourself in. I mean, did the branch at the park I went to fall during a windstorm? Probably, but it certainly could have fallen just due to nature. Branches don't often fall as a result of nature, but it is possible. One last short story before I end this video, because I know I've been off script here and I've been rambling a little bit. Years ago, when I was with some scouts, we were camping on the coast in California. I don't know exactly where, somewhere maybe a little south of Santa Cruz. At any rate, it was very, very windy, and I want to say the ranger came by the evening that it was windy and said, look, it's really windy, we've had some issues with some of these trees, like, watch out, right? And I think we talked about it, the adults talked about it, I don't know if the scouts had an opinion, but I think we all kind of decided, well, we're going to rough it, not that big of a deal, right? So, come next morning, it was mostly okay. There were a couple big acorns here and there or something, or pine cones, I think. Big acorns, right? There are a couple big pine cones. But there was one really big branch that fell, I think, a few feet from one of the adults' tents. And I can tell you that although it might not necessarily have killed them, it would have been bad. Broken bones, broken rib cage, maybe at worst a collapsed lung or some type of really awful compound bleeding. I'm sure there was a hospital within 30 minutes or an hour away, but heaven forbid you puncture a lung, and 30 minutes with a punctured lung, that's a long time, right? So we made the dangerous decision to stay overnight. In the future, if I was camping and the winds were getting really crazy and stuff was falling out of trees, would I leave? I don't know. But I might at least try to get away from large trees or something, right? So what is the moral of this story? I'm not sure. But if it's really windy, just be careful. You know, do what you can. Sometimes you got to go to work. Sometimes you got to take care of stuff. But maybe just be a little bit extra cautious and just kind of keep aware of your surroundings. Till next time, like, comment, subscribe, and keep prepping.